The first thing I remember about that day was the silence. Not the kind that comforts, but the kind that presses down on you, thick and suffocating, until you can hear nothing but the sound of your own heartbeat. The fog was rolling in from the bay, heavy and cold, wrapping around the tombstones like ghostly fingers. We were standing in a cemetery in San Francisco, and my grandmother's casket was being lowered into the ground. The air smelled of wet earth and salt. Everyone around me had their heads bowed, some in tears, but not my parents. No, they weren't grieving. They were arguing. Even in death, my grandmother couldn't bring peace to this family. My father's voice cut through the quiet like a blade, sharp, loud, unrelenting. He was telling my mother she had no right to touch his mother's estate. My mother fired back before the words even finished leaving his mouth. Her tone was venom wrapped in silk. She said she deserved half because she had been the one by Margaret's side in those final weeks. Their voices grew louder, sharper, the kind of argument that makes people shift uncomfortably, pretending not to hear. But everyone hears. Everyone always hears. Then, in the middle of it all, my father turned to me. His face was hard, his eyes like cold iron. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't care who was watching. "Ethan," he said, each syllable dripping with disdain, "you get nothing. You don't deserve a single dollar of her fortune." And before I could even process the humiliation burning through me, my mother stepped in, her words slicing deeper than his. "Your grandmother may have spoiled you," she said, "but she didn't raise a man who can carry the Roar name with pride." It was like being punched in the chest. The cold wind, the damp fog, the weight of their words, everything hit at once. I clenched my fists so tightly I could feel my nails biting into my palms, trying to keep the anger buried. Because if I spoke, if I let even one word slip out, my voice would have cracked. I wanted to scream, to tell them that I didn't care about the money, that I never had, that all I cared about was her. My grandmother, Margaret Roar, the only person in that entire family who ever made me feel like I mattered. She once told me, "Ethan, you see the world differently, and that's your gift." Now, standing there in that cold cemetery, I realized just how alone I was without her. The fog thickened, clinging to the old headstones and swallowing the tops of the Victorian homes in the distance. The church bells tolled slowly, each note echoing through the gray air like a reminder of everything I'd lost. San Francisco looked beautiful that morning, but it was the kind of beauty that hurts to look at. Cold, detached, indifferent. My grandmother had been the heart of this family. She was the one who remembered birthdays, who hosted dinners, who made even the most bitter moments feel bearable. Without her, the Roar family wasn't a family at all. Just a collection of people tied together by blood and greed. I stood stiff in a black suit that didn't fit quite right. Borrowed from a friend because my parents didn't think I was worth spending money on for things like this. My hands were shoved into my pockets, my head bowed, not in prayer, but in shame. My parents stood near the front, dressed like royalty even in mourning. My mother's tailored black dress and pearls gleamed like armor. My father's silver tie reflected the gray light as if to announce his control over everything. Even here, even now. They looked like a grieving couple. But their grief wasn't for her. Their grief was for what she'd left behind. A fortune worth $12 million, spread across properties, investments, a lifetime of hard-earned success. To them, this wasn't just a loss, it was an opportunity, and I knew it. Everyone did. When Grandma was alive, things were different. She had this way of softening their sharp edges. At dinner, when my father criticized me for not becoming a lawyer like him, she'd reach across and take my hand, her silent reminder that I didn't need to be like him to be worthy. When my mother scolded me for gaining weight, Grandma would quietly slip an extra cookie onto my plate and wink. She believed in kindness, not the kind that's loud or performative, but the quiet, steady kind that holds you together when the world tries to break you apart. "Don't let them measure your worth by their yardstick," she told me once. "You have your own path, Ethan. One day the world will see it." Those words carried me through years of feeling like a ghost in my own home. My mother wanted a son who reflected her, polished, ambitious, ruthless. Instead, she got me, a quiet dreamer who preferred art and books to stock reports in courtrooms. She called my passions wastes of time. My father called them proof of weakness. "You'll never lead this family," he said once, his voice cold as marble. You don't deserve the name Roar. I learned early on that silence was safer than honesty. But Grandma always saw through me. She'd smile and remind me that strength wasn't about money or dominance, it was about honesty, empathy, heart. As the priest spoke, I scanned the rows of mourners. My Uncle Jonas sat near the front, shifting impatiently, his eyes flicking toward the casket like it was a vault instead of a resting place. My cousins whispered among themselves, their suits crisp, their eyes full of curiosity, not sorrow. They were here for what she left, not for who she was. And I felt like a stranger among them. When the service ended, the quiet shattered. Conversations buzzed, hushed but pointed, like bees circling a carcass. My parents stayed near the casket, their voices low at first, then louder, rising above the murmurs. "You don't get to touch a penny of this estate," my father hissed. "I made the decisions that built this family's name." Clara, my mother, squared her shoulders, her voice cutting like glass. "You think you built this? I was the one who stayed by her side while you buried yourself in work. I earned my place." The argument spiraled. People pretended not to look, but every ear was tuned in. My uncle smirked, enjoying the show. My cousins whispered, eyes darting like spectators waiting for the next punch. Then it happened again. My father turned toward me, that same expression, that same burning contempt. "And as for you, Ethan," he said, his words loud enough for everyone to hear, "don't think for 1 second you're entitled to anything. You've done nothing to earn it. You've been nothing but a disappointment." The words hung in the air, heavy and cruel. My mother folded her arms, lips curling in disdain. "He's right," she said, her tone calm but deadly. "Your grandmother may have spoiled you, but she didn't prepare you for reality. You don't contribute, you don't lead, you are not part of what we've built." Every word was a nail in the coffin, not hers, but mine. People stared, some looked away, others didn't bother to hide their pity or amusement. My uncle chuckled. "Guess you'll finally have to learn to work for a living," he said, his smirk widening. The humiliation burned through me. I wanted to shout, to remind them I had never asked for money, never wanted their approval tied to wealth. All I had ever wanted was a family, but the words caught in my throat. I could almost hear Grandma's voice in my head. "Hold your head high, Ethan." Real strength doesn't shout, but in that moment those words felt distant, like a memory slipping through my fingers. Their fight continued, echoing across the cemetery like thunder. Assets, investments, control. None of it mattered anymore. But to them, it was everything. The shame clung to me like smoke. I felt every eye on me, every whispered judgment. I stood there, silent, forcing myself not to crumble. And then, just when I thought the humiliation had reached its peak, it stopped. Not because they were sorry, not because they realized how far they'd gone, but because they were exhausted. My father's face was red with anger, my mother's lips tight with false victory. My uncle turned away, smirking, whispering something to his son. The others followed, leaving me standing there, alone among the graves, my parents' words still echoing in my head. I thought that was it, that the day would end like that with nothing but bitterness and silence. But then I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Ethan," a quiet voice said behind me. I turned. Standing there was Robert Hale, my grandmother's lawyer. Tall, composed, his gray hair perfectly combed, his dark suit immaculate. In a sea of greed and noise, he looked out of place, calm, steady, almost gentle. "Your grandmother asked me to speak with you today," he said softly. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. My parents had made it clear I was cut out of everything. Yet here was the man who knew every word of her will, looking at me with a kind of quiet seriousness that made my pulse quicken. I nodded, following him as he gestured toward a small study tucked off the side of the church hall. The door clicked shut behind us, muting the distant murmurs and laughter from the other mourners. The room was dim. A single beam of light filtered through a narrow stained glass window, painting shards of color across the wooden floor. On the desk in the center of the room lay an envelope, old, yellowed at the edges, sealed in wax. My name was written across the front in handwriting I would know anywhere. My grandmother's. My breath caught, my hands trembled as I reached out. I hovered just inches away, afraid to touch it, afraid of what it might say. The last time I'd seen that handwriting had been in the notes she used to slip into my sketchbooks, small messages written in her favorite blue ink. Notes that said things like, "I believe in you, Ethan," or don't forget how bright your light is. Now that same handwriting sat in front of me, waiting. I tore the envelope open. The paper inside was folded carefully, her scent, lavender and old parchment, still faintly there. My eyes fell on the first line, and for a moment, everything stopped. The air, my heartbeat, the world outside. Whatever was written there, whatever secret she had left behind, was about to change everything I thought I knew about her, about my family, and about myself. Because Margaret Rohr may have been gone, but she wasn't finished yet. And this letter was only the beginning. The sound of the lock turning echoed like thunder in my chest. I didn't know it then, but that moment, that single click, would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my life, and myself. You ever have a moment where time seems to slow down, where every breath feels heavy, every heartbeat louder than it should be? That's what it felt like as I stood in that small, dimly lit bank room in San Francisco, staring at the metal safety deposit box my grandmother had left for me. The air smelled faintly of metal and polish, and I could still feel the chill from outside clinging to my skin. My fingers trembled slightly as I turned the brass key, her key, in the lock. For a second, I just stared. The box slid free with a soft metallic scrape, heavier than I expected. I carried it to the table, set it down gently, and just looked at it. This was it, my grandmother's secret. Something she'd kept hidden from everyone, even from my parents. Especially from them. I took a deep breath, lifted the lid, and my entire world shifted. Inside were three things: a stack of leather-bound journals, a small velvet pouch, and a sealed envelope addressed in that same familiar handwriting that used to sign my birthday cards. To Ethan, when you are ready. Her handwriting hit me harder than any word my parents had ever said. That delicate, looping script, calm, certain, and somehow still alive, felt like her voice whispering from beyond the grave. My throat tightened as I reached for the journals first. The leather was worn smooth, the edges of the pages yellowed and soft. When I untied the faded ribbon and opened the first one, the scent of old ink and time filled the air. And there it was, her story. Page after page, line after line, she had written her life down in these books. At first, it was her memories, childhood in poverty, the struggles of a single mother raising her alone, the long nights she'd spent working, saving, building. I could see her in my mind, young, determined, fighting for something no one else could see. But as I kept reading, the tone changed. Her words grew sharper, more guarded, filled with pain and disappointment. She wrote about my parents, Victor and Clara, how they had slowly wrapped themselves around her empire, manipulating, deceiving, convincing her to move money into investments they controlled. How my Uncle Jonas had siphoned funds through fake companies, using her name to sign deals she never approved. She knew everything, every betrayal, every lie, and yet she never exposed them. She said she couldn't bear to see the family torn apart. But she also wrote something else, something that made my heart stop. Open quote, "Ethan, you must know the truth. They will destroy each other for wealth, but you must not become them. These journals are my legacy. With them comes responsibilities." Close quote. My hand froze on the page. The sound of those words echoed in my mind long after I read them. She wasn't just telling me her story, she was entrusting me with it. She wanted me to carry the truth, to protect it, maybe even to use it. I sat back, the room spinning slightly. All my life I had been told I was weak, a disappointment, a waste. And yet here was proof, written in my grandmother's own hand, that I was the one she believed in. Not my father, not my mother, not Jonas. Me. The next item I touched was the velvet pouch. It felt soft against my skin, delicate, like something that didn't belong in a place as cold and sterile as that vault. I loosened the drawstring and poured the contents onto the table. Jewelry spilled out, glimmering even in the dim light. A diamond brooch, a string of pearls, a gold pocket watch engraved with her initials. Every piece was something I'd seen her wear, items that seemed ordinary at family dinners but were now mine. Beneath the jewelry was a folded piece of paper. I opened it and felt my chest tighten. It was a property certificate, a cottage, north of the city, in her name. A place I'd never heard her mention, never seen in any of the family records. She'd kept it hidden, off the books, away from the estate. My parents had no idea it existed, and now it was mine. My hands trembled as I reached for the last envelope. It was sealed carefully, the wax stamp unbroken. My name, Ethan, was written across the front in the same firm, elegant script. I hesitated. My pulse pounded in my ears, and then I broke the seal. Her words, simple, powerful, changed everything. Open quote. Ethan, I have left you what I could not trust in anyone else's hands. The journals contain the truths I could never speak aloud. The jewelry and the property are yours alone, gifts to remind you of my faith in you. Do not waste them. Use them to build a life that reflects who you are, not who they want you to be. Remember, wealth means nothing without integrity. Promise me you will carry forward what I valued most: honesty, kindness, and courage. Close quote. Tears blurred my eyes before I even realized I was crying. For so long, I'd believed her silence meant she didn't see the cruelty my parents put me through. But now I understood. She had seen it. She had known. And instead of fighting them directly, she'd left her legacy in my hands. Quietly, deliberately. I stayed in that small room for hours, reading, rereading, letting the weight of it all sink in. The jewelry sparkled faintly in front of me, but it wasn't the gold or the diamonds that made my heart race. It was the truth buried in her words, the power she had passed to me. When I finally placed everything back into the box, I caught my reflection in the polished metal of the vault door. I looked different. My face, pale and tired just hours ago, now carried something new: resolve. Walking out of that bank, the San Francisco fog greeted me like an old friend. The streets were damp, slick with rain. Cable cars rattled in the distance. Life went on as if nothing had changed, but everything had. My parents thought they had stripped me of everything. They thought I was finished, but they were wrong. I had something they could never buy or control: the truth. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. The box rested on the table beside me, the journals stacked neatly, the key glinting faintly under the lamp. The city outside buzzed with life, but inside the silence was almost sacred. I opened the first journal again. Her words seemed to breathe. Every sentence felt like a whisper from her, like she was there, guiding me. Open quote, "Do not let them measure your worth by their yardstick." Close quote. She had told me that once, years ago, when I was just a boy, but now it carried new meaning. The pages revealed more than I expected. Hidden deals, secret accounts, names I didn't recognize, lawyers, business partners, politicians. My grandmother had built an empire quietly, strategically, but she had done it differently than my parents ever would have. She had done it with honor, and she had seen the cracks forming long before anyone else did. As I turned another page, I saw her handwriting tremble slightly, a note written not as a record, but as a warning. Open quote, "If you're reading this, Ethan, it means I am gone. Be careful. The truth inside these pages can free you or destroy them, but once it's known, there's no turning back." Close quote. My pulse quickened. I looked at the stack of journals again. There were at least 6 of them, maybe more. Decades of secrets. If even half of what she hinted at was true, it could tear apart everything my father and mother had built. But was that what she wanted? I didn't know yet. All I knew was that I couldn't ignore it. The clock ticked softly on the wall as I sat there, the envelope open, her words replaying in my mind. She had trusted me. That thought kept circling in my head. She trusted me. For years I had been invisible, mocked, dismissed, ignored. But now, I was the keeper of something they couldn't touch. When I finally looked out the window, the fog had returned, curling through the streets like smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a cable car bell rang. It sounded almost like a heartbeat. I reached into the box one more time and took out the small gold pocket watch. It was cool in my hand, its engraved initials catching the light. When I opened it, I saw a photo inside, a black and white picture of her holding me as a baby. And beneath the photo, etched into the metal, were 4 words: "The truth is yours." I swallowed hard. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her handwriting. I heard her voice. I saw my father's anger, my mother's cold smile, my uncle's smirk, and somewhere between all of it, I saw the key. That tiny brass key that had unlocked more than a box. It had unlocked everything. By morning, I knew what I had to do. The journals weren't just for me to read. They were instructions, a roadmap to something she had hidden, maybe in that coastal cottage, maybe somewhere else entirely. I slipped the letter into my jacket, tucked the journals carefully into my backpack, and stepped outside. The air was sharp and cold. The city was just waking up, unaware that somewhere among its foggy streets, a forgotten grandson was about to uncover the kind of truth that could shatter an entire dynasty. My parents believed they had silenced me forever, but they didn't realize the story wasn't over, not even close, because now I held the truth, and soon they would too. Imagine losing everything you thought mattered, your place in the family, your dignity, your sense of belonging. Imagine standing in a room filled with people who share your blood, yet you've never felt more alone. That's where my story begins. At my grandmother's funeral, surrounded by laughter that hid greed, Smiles that masked betrayal, and eyes that looked at me not as family, but as a mistake. They thought they had erased me. They thought I was done. But they were wrong. Because that was the day I discovered something far greater than money. Something buried beneath years of deceit. A truth powerful enough to change everything. Her voice still echoes in my head. She left this for you alone. She trusted you, Ethan. Those words struck deeper than any insult my parents ever threw my way. She trusted me, in a family where I had spent my life being told I wasn't enough. For the first time, I realized someone had seen me. I remember standing there, the envelope trembling in my hands. The paper felt fragile, old, but the weight of it was undeniable. A lifetime of doubt clawed at me. What if it was just a letter of comfort? A polite goodbye from a woman I'd adored but never truly known? But something in my gut told me this was different. When I slid my finger beneath the flap and tore it open, a small brass key slipped out tied to a ribbon. My heart nearly stopped. Inside the letter, written in her elegant, familiar script, were the words that changed everything. Ethan, you are the only one who ever truly saw me, not my money. That is why I trust you with what no one else knows. I read it again and again, each word cutting through the noise of years of rejection. My grandmother had known. She had seen the greed in my parents' eyes, the manipulation, the cold hunger for power that had poisoned our family. And she had chosen me, not because I was her favorite, but because I was the only one who could be trusted with the truth. Robert, her attorney, stood quietly in the corner. "Take your time," he said softly, but his eyes, they already knew I was about to make a decision that would change my life. She wrote about her legacy, not the money, not the estate, but something deeper, something sacred. She had built an empire but feared what would happen to it in the wrong hands. And the key, she said, would lead me to what she couldn't trust anyone else with, a safety deposit box, a hidden piece of her life, something my parents didn't even know existed. My hands shook as I folded the letter back into the envelope. That brass key gleamed faintly in the light. I didn't know why, but holding it made me feel powerful. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the disappointment they whispered about behind closed doors. I was chosen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark of my small apartment, the envelope and the key resting on my nightstand like a secret waiting to be uncovered. Her words replayed in my mind again and again. She trusted me. The thought made my chest ache and my hands tremble. By morning, the decision was made. I had to know what she'd left. The streets of San Francisco were slick with rain as I made my way to the bank, she mentioned. It was an old building, brick walls, iron doors, the kind of place that seemed to breathe history. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. A man in a dark vest checked my ID, matched my name to her authorization, and led me through a long corridor. The sound of our footsteps echoed off the marble floor until we reached the vault, a massive steel door that looked like it belonged in a museum. With a series of clicks and heavy turns, the door opened. Inside, rows of small metal doors lined the walls like silent sentinels. He stopped at one, her number. "You may use a private room," he said, handing me a tray. The key turned smoothly, like it had been waiting for me all along. When I slid the box out, my chest tightened. It was heavier than I expected. I carried it into a small side room, closed the door, and stared at it for a long time before lifting the lid. Inside were three things: a stack of leather-bound journals tied with a faded ribbon, a velvet pouch, and a sealed envelope addressed to me, again in her handwriting. "To Ethan, when you are ready." My throat tightened. I untied the ribbon and opened the first journal. The pages were old, yellowed at the edges, but her handwriting was still strong and steady. What I read next shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. She had written about her life, the years of struggle, the sacrifices, the empire she had built from nothing. But as I turned the pages, her words darkened. She spoke of betrayal, of Victor and Clara manipulating her finances, using her trust for their gain, of Jonas secretly siphoning money through deals she never approved. My parents and uncle, the same people who paraded around her funeral as the proud heirs, had been draining her, betraying her, for years. But she had known, she had seen it all, and she had stayed silent, protecting the family name, until now. "Ethan," she wrote, "you must know the truth. They will destroy each other for wealth, but you must not become them. These journals are my legacy. With them comes responsibility and a choice." I sat there in silence, her words burning into my mind. All my life, I'd been told I was weak, a disappointment. But now I realized she had been watching me all along. She'd seen through their lies, through the arrogance and deceit, and chosen me to carry what truly mattered. My hands moved to the velvet pouch. Inside was a collection of jewelry, vintage, rare, priceless. A diamond brooch, a string of pearls, a gold pocket watch engraved with her initials. Beneath them lay a folded certificate, ownership of a coastal cottage, a property no one else knew about. She had hidden it for me. Finally, I opened the sealed envelope. My name stood bold across the front. Ethan, I have left you what I could not trust in anyone else's hands. The journals contain the truths I could never speak aloud. The jewelry and the property are yours alone, reminders of my faith in you. Do not waste them. Use them to build a life that reflects who you are, not who they want you to be. Remember, wealth means nothing without integrity. Tears blurred my vision. She hadn't just left me valuables. She had left me purpose. For the first time, I understood. Her legacy wasn't something to inherit, it was something to live. That night, I sat in my apartment again, the journals stacked neatly in front of me, the jewelry glinting in the dim light. The cottage certificate lay beside them like a promise of freedom. She had given me something my parents never could: belief. They had power, but no peace. Money, but no meaning. And me, I had her words, her truth, her trust. Days passed, and my parents never reached out. They assumed I had slunk away in humiliation, another casualty in their endless fight for control. That silence, it gave me something I'd never had before: freedom. No more chasing their approval. No more waiting for recognition. I was standing on my own, guided by her voice. A week later, I visited the cottage. It sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean, the waves crashing below, the air heavy with salt and wind. White shutters framed the windows, and a wild garden surrounded the house. Inside, sunlight spilled across worn floors, illuminating old photographs, moments of her life frozen in time. It felt like a sanctuary, a place untouched by greed or bitterness. Standing in that quiet kitchen, I could almost hear her laugh again, that soft, knowing sound that used to make me feel safe. And I knew then, this was more than a house. It was a gift of peace, a chance to rebuild myself from the ashes of their cruelty. For years, I thought my parents' rejection defined me, but standing there, I realized something. Their cruelty had never been about me. It had been about them, their emptiness, their hunger for power, their fear of losing control. I had carried their rejection like a wound, believing it was proof that I was broken. But I wasn't. I was free. They were chained to greed. I was the one chosen because I could see beyond it. The journals became my compass. Every page revealed her strength, her mistakes, her humanity. I wrestled with what to do. Should I expose the truth and watch them burn under the weight of their lies? Or should I protect her memory, honor her values, and focus on becoming the kind of person she believed I could be? In the end, I understood. The power wasn't in revenge. The power was in building something better. I didn't want to destroy them. I wanted to outgrow them. So I did. I chose her path, not theirs. And as I look back now, I realize that her funeral wasn't an ending. It was the beginning. The beginning of a life where I was no longer invisible, no longer the forgotten son, but a man defined by the strength she saw in me all along. Because in the end, family can fail you. Parents can wound you. But sometimes love from just one person can rewrite your entire story. And as I sit here tonight, the ocean whispering outside the cottage window, her words still echo softly through my mind. Wealth means nothing without integrity. I promised her I would carry that forward. And now, every time I unlock that box, every time I turn the pages of her journals, I realize this is only the beginning. Because somewhere within those pages, buried beneath the secrets she left behind, is a truth I haven't uncovered yet. And when I find it, everything will change again.